Thank you for checking out Writer's Underworld. Today we are doing writing lessons, lesson number 2. Today's lesson is identity, which at first thought you might say, what does identity have to do with writing? Well, I'll tell you, identity has everything to do with writing. Now, how you should think about it is like a fingerprint, right? Your identity is going to either stain or paint everything you do. If it's good, it's like a beautiful color. And if it's bad, it's like an ugly stain. So you need to, when you're just starting out, this ties into lesson 1, when you're doing your words and your poetry and your short stories and your vignettes and all these things you should be doing from lesson 1 of learning about words, also be trying to consider how you're coming across as a human being. Ultimately, that's what we are. And as human beings, we have an identity. What people talk about that I've heard, I don't really hear people talk about this, but they do talk about lived experience. And this is one example of how your identity colors your writing. Lived experience is just one part of it, but it's really the only part that people seem to mention. And I'm not going to really get into that. Actually, I am, but maybe a little bit later. But, you got to think about who you are as a person. And I've always kind of done this by instinct. And I don't know if anybody else does it, but I know as a reader, when you're reading books, you can tell. You're like, this guy's a chode, this guy's a schmutz, this guy's a dork, whatever. And but that's okay. It's okay to be a chode and a schmutz and a dork. I've probably been all these things at some point in time. Personally, I know I'm a very annoying person. They'd be reading me and they'd be like, this guy's so annoying. And I'm like, okay, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Because that's your identity. You can't, and the part of the bitter pill to swallow is that you can't really change it. But the thing I want to say is, if you're a dweeb, then you should be the dweebiest dweeb who has ever dweebed, and me, I was kind of a screw up. So I tried to be the screwiest screw up who ever screwed up, and I was pretty good at it. But one thing that you can do to improve whatever hand you've been dealt, to improve your lot in life, is to, try and think of what are your character defects and turn your defects into assets and advantages by reversing them, really. Like, so what was my problem? My problem was like I was a huge loser because all I did all the time was write these books over here, and I never accomplished anything because all I was doing was writing. So I was crashing around wherever I could. I was living in vans. I was getting kicked out of houses, and I was doing whatever I could. I was being supported by my mother for a lot of the time, which sucked, but that's how I wrote a lot of these books, at least the first few. And that was in, if you ever watched Californication, when David Duchovny's daughter was like, I want to be a writer. And then David Duchovny was talking to the mother, and he's like, she's going to be living on your couch for 10 years. And, that's kind of how it goes. Because the alternative is don't make a lot of progress. Like where I'm at now, sure, I'm an upstanding citizen, but I don't make a lot of progress. When I was a complete, total loser, I made a ton of progress. So you got to think about it. That's the way to get chicks too. When I was a total loser, all I did was write. I got a ton of chicks. When I become an upstanding citizen, no chicks. So, but yeah, you want to take so for instance, I was a loser. And then eventually I, thought about it, how I was kind of always trying to think about how to not be a loser. And it occurred to me, well, once I started becoming gainfully employed, uh, long story short, I became a truck driver because I was like, nobody's going to hate on truck drivers, which was a joke because now everybody hates on truck drivers all the time. But at the time, it seemed like, this is a way where, somebody will respect me as a person. And this is just anecdotal, it could be anything. But, now a lot of what people are talking about is, why don't men want to read? And I'll tell you why. I can tell you very easily why men don't want to read. Because we want to look up to people. We don't want to look down on people. And the problem is, if you're, loser failure, you're not giving men anything to look up to. And sorry to say it, if you're anything besides the male ideal, what men do want to look up to, then we're going to be looking down at you, and you don't want to be. And that's why people don't want to read it, because, and this identity thing is such a problem that a lot of authors, I can't stand them because I know I wouldn't want to talk to this person. I wouldn't want to hang out with this person. I don't want to hear anything this person has to say. I don't want to be near this person. I'm very disinterested in what they're talking about. They don't know how to grab you, it's just, it's not a nice thing to hear. But, if you're in the beginning stages of your writing, such as if you're just going into my lesson 1, you can be adjusting these things over the course of time. And I always had this in the kind of the back of my mind. But, you don't have to, like, I was a screw up, so I just became really good at being a screw up. But dude, if you have your act together and, you're really smart and you're highly educated and, you don't have any vices, you got a lot of virtues, whatever you are, you can refine that and turn it into your thing. And I think, that's what people appreciate, is an individual who is highly refined in whatever they are, such as the dweebiest dweeb who has ever dweebed. I would love to read the dweebiest dweeb because he is the dweebiest, and if you're the most boring, be the most boring. Good example of that was Ben Stein. That was his whole shtick, was he was the most boring guy you ever heard, and he was very successful just being very boring. So what is there left to say about identity? Say that it's going to make you or break you as an individual. I can't talk about success because I've had this much success. Actually, this would be 3 successes. I have 0 successes. So I ain't going to talk to you about success, but I will talk to you about your integrity, because that's what my whole thing. I banked everything on integrity, and this, this is a big part of identity, is having integrity. All I'm saying is it's like a fingerprint. Okay, I gotta go back to repeating myself to get forward here. You cannot escape who you are, and who you are is going to determine whether you write well or write poorly, because this is an art form, and into the next lesson, people need to be looking up to you. We cannot be looking down at you. Nobody wants to look down at anybody because you already been down. The human nature is to be down there. This is about being up there, up there. People need to be looking up at you, what you are, who you are. How do you do this? I mean, it would be silly for me to start talking about all the ways I was and the things I did, who I thought I could be and what I wanted to become. Because we're here to talk about writing. But I did a lot of stuff from the beginning to the end. I was always getting into things because that was my whole thing about being a screw up, the screwiest screw up. It was this guy. And I was always getting into things. And it shaped me as a person. But the whole time I was writing. And that's the thing. I mean, the one thing, the solid move you can make here is to just be a real writer. Don't be a hustler. Like we see all these people out there trying to hustle. You forget about it. This is what is important, creating your novels. The rest is nothing. And so if you really want to fix your identity, laser in on your writing endeavors, because then all other things aside, if you got a defective character, which everybody does, nobody can say, well, he's not a real writer, because they're all going to judge you no matter what. But if you got your writing thing down and they are judging you by your writing, they cannot come at you about your identity. The reason people start examining your identity is because your writing is failing. And the reason your writing is failing is because your identity is, not carrying the burden of your failing writing. So you could think of it as a crutch. If you're a legit person, then if your writing is dropping, people are always talking about the stories, this story, and why they write series. You write a series so people get invested into the story, and then they're going to read all your series. But people forget, it used to be about the author. It used to not be about the stories of the series or anything. You got invested into the author, and then whatever the author did, it was good. And what is the author? He is an identity, or she. That's a whole other thing. Women, quick tip at the end for the ladies out there, because I talk a lot about men and forget about the ladies. And I give the ladies a hard time about writing because there's so many of them writing. If you observe the best writers, I'll give 3 examples. They all had difficult lives. Okay, Ayn Rand escaped communist Russia. Anne Rice lost her little baby. Oh man, there's one other I forgot. Taylor Caldwell came up, through the Depression, I imagine. She had a very difficult life. It's just, you could trace this back. Find all your favorite female authors, and you're going to notice the thread that they all had difficult lives. So I think the moral of that story is you got to harness your pain, whatever it is. Because, women, it's not in their nature to be fighting for something. They kind of just float along, but the women who've had to fight through strife, they have had a captivating identity as a result. All right, I gotta end the video. That's lesson 2, identity. So we got lesson 1 is your words, which is an ongoing thing forever. Lesson 2, identity, ongoing thing forever. And lesson 3, I can assure you, will be an ongoing thing forever. Thanks for checking out Writers Underworld. This is